Have you ever had that dream, no, that nightmare, where you pull your gun, aim, and squeeze with all your might? It's life or death, but for all your efforts, you can't squeeze hard enough to pull that trigger. Feelings of shame and fear and frustration well up in you to the point that you suddenly wake up. What was all of that about? And why does that dream keep happening? Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. I spend a lot of time with police officers, and I believe that they deserve more encouragement than what they usually get. So on this podcast, you'll hear from officers who have been where you are, sharing their wisdom, experiences, and the lessons that they've learned. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are going to help you navigate with confidence through your career and beyond. Many of you have been asking for my podcast magnet to stick to the fridge in your police department. And hey, just ask and I'll mail them to you. But trust me, pointing to the magnet is just step one. I have to literally take an officer by the arm and show him the QR code on the magnet so that he can scan it and then find the show on his phone. The ones that you guide directly to the show, step by step, will be grateful for it. They'll probably become fans themselves. But to the person who has never listened to a podcast before, just telling them about it probably won't move the needle for them. So think about your strategy for how you're going to share the Hey Chaplain podcast. This is how podcasts grow, and I deeply appreciate it. Today we're talking about the recurring dreams and nightmares that cops have, and that's what we're asking Dr. Dara Rampersad. He's a first responder and a forensic psychologist from Phoenix, Arizona, who specializes in first responder mental health. Here's Dr. Dara Rampersad. Hello, Dr. Rampersad. How are you today?
Hi, good afternoon, Chaplain. Good to meet with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. You came highly recommended, and I was really excited to be able to get you on the phone here and maybe give me just a little bit of background for you. What is your interaction with law enforcement mental health? What do you do?
I'm a first responder psychologist, and I own a company called BluePaz, First Responder Services, here in Phoenix, Arizona. And luckily, we get to work nationwide in a variety of ways. We do therapy services for first responders, as well as training services and critical incident stress debriefings and management, as well as negotiations training and crisis intervention training. So we do a lot of stuff with first responders, but we're all heavily embedded. Me and my staff that I have really assist in taking care of as many people as we can. As much as we can for as long as we can. Those are the words that we kind of swear by.
That's awesome. I brought you in today to talk to you about the dreams that police officers have. A lot of cops have dreams where they pull their gun and they, can't pull that trigger no matter how hard they squeeze, or they can't pull the gun out of the holster. And it's this terribly panic-inducing kind of dream. And I have a listener that wrote in, his name is Paul from Kansas City, and he said that he has that dream, but his most commonly recurring dream is the one where the trigger pulls, but nothing happens.
Yeah.
And he has this nightmare. A lot of cops have similar nightmares all the time. Doctor, what do you make of that?
So we have three versions of that dream. The first one is a 10,000-pound trigger pull, which is really difficult. Or there's even a version of that dream where the officer reaches for their gun, but the gun isn't in the holster.
Oh,
and
okay.
So they won't even have the weapon with them. And then we also have that when you pull the trigger, that nothing comes out, or if something comes out, it kind of goes like pew, and then it just trajectories down, and it doesn't hurt the person. I suppose there's another version of that dream where it hits the person, but it's like rubber bullets, and so then it bounces off of the person.
Yeah. Right.
So,
what are those? What are those dreams?
When you start to get to those types of dreams, they usually are stress-induced dreams. But I feel like, in order to understand these dreams, you have to understand really the anxieties that the person is trying to cope with in their daily life. Now, you and I are just two regular human beings, right? Living our life. And in our lives, we probably have relationship stress, financial stress, work stress, health stress, right? We have a variety of different buckets that we have stresses in. And I think that is hard pressed for us to not think that those things spill over into other buckets, including employment stress. And you've worked with cops for a long time too, Chaplain, and I know that I have. One of these recurrent things that happens in law enforcement, especially, is administrative stress, where guys are trying to do their job, and then they have this administration that is at times to them not supportive in what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so that builds up over time, and then people start to incorporate these stresses into their dream structures. And what we'll tend to find is when folks are getting towards that level of dream, it usually is due to some sort of safety concern. When I've had a lot of these folks with these types of dreams, sometimes something happened in their family that maybe they couldn't be there for. And they were trying to be able to get there to protect their family, but they could not. And in a version of those dreams, actually, the officer is trying to pull their weapon to defend a family member.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're chasing suspects, but in a lot of cases, they're trying to defend a family member or protect their family member, and they can't. They become ineffectual in a dream. And I think that really plays out to a lot of the anxieties that people have in general about not being prepared and ready to be able to fight and defend, even though they know that they are trained and they are ready for that fight in real life because they train, practice, right? And then execute. But I've worked with a lot of people that have actually shot and had to neutralize threats, as well as people who have that on their mind that could I do it if I were called upon to do it? I know that I signed up for it, but do I have the ability to actually do it? And so those two categories of people really fall onto different spectrums, because the person that actually does complete the act of shooting someone when they have to and when they need to in their jobs, all of a sudden the anxiety drops a fair amount in terms of that type of defensive dream, because they know that they have what it takes to be able to do it. But now a different dream cycle starts, right? Which is the repetition of the act of shooting somebody. And so those officer-involved shooting dreams then start to take a different twist to them.
Okay. The anxiety dream, and I don't even know if that's still the right terminology. Is that what we still call it? An anxiety dream? Okay.
I would say so.
So this anxiety dreams, sometimes it may present itself as something work-related, but it may actually be a different area of their background. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think so. I feel like, if our house isn't in order, it's hard to make, things straight at work. You could have things straight at work, but but it's still, your house still needs to be in check.
And that's stereotypically true of cops, where the last thing that will suffer will be the job.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's pretty common. That's stereotypical anyway. Yeah. If someone's having these anxiety dreams, whether it's the gun-related ones or whether it's a different form of anxiety dream, what should they be doing about it? Should they be trying to identify the source of the anxiety? Should they just not worry about it, let it go away? What do you recommend?
Honestly, one of the easiest things to do, I know that not everybody likes to talk to someone or talk with someone. So if you start writing these things out and you label it, just either in your dream structure as, things that I'm thinking about, because we don't want to necessarily label it as these are my anxieties, but things that are on my mind.
Right.
Because we want to make it digestible and easy to be able to overcome, right? So what are the things on my mind? And then you just start writing down these things. Back in the day when we were growing up, we used to have a pen and paper next to our bed that we would probably wake up and start taking notes on things that were on our mind.
Sure.
And I feel like that's a healthier way. What turns out to work well the best, I would say, is if you actually find someone you trust that you could tell and talk to about your dreams. I've often found that that is the most helpful way.
Mm.
If you feel like you can't or you don't want to, and frankly, a lot of cops, they don't want to burden anybody else with their stuff, right? So
Yeah.
they're trying their best to keep things. But that's why I like professional staff. Like if you find a professional person you could speak with, dump on them all day long. That's what they're there for, Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
they want that.
I've had these off and on over the course of my life, and they probably were associated with stress, at home or stress at work. But if you're having them regularly, is there a point at which that becomes a concern where maybe it's not just occasional anxiety, but maybe it's something more like a disorder?
Yeah, so all sleep experts would tell you that you try to aim for about 6 hours of sleep, which is 3 REM cycles, right?
Okay.
Now it depends on your load that you're in. So like if I have a patrol function that I'm doing, I may run, let's say, I don't know, 8 to 12 calls, right, on a shift. Well, that's a lot of stuff that I just encountered. Some of them might be very light calls and some of them might be harder calls. And when I'm only getting 4 hours sleep, which is what a typical cop gets, about 4 to 4.5 hours of sleep, is not enough time to file away all of the junk that you were exposed to on your shift, much less all of the stuff that you encountered during your day, right?
Yeah.
So I always like to encourage our officers to try to get to that 6 hour mark. And if you can, obviously 7 hours would be even better. But, it takes constant trying to find that balance to try to get there. So I think that, I talk about sleep first as you ask that question, because I think it's so vital in order to process these. We need time to process all of this stuff that we see during the day. And I just don't feel like guys get enough of it. If you notice that your sleep is getting even reduced even more, so you're getting less than 4.5 hours. Thank you for rephrasing that. And so you get even fewer than 4.5 hours, and you're avoiding sleep because you're afraid of the dreams that you're having, and you don't want to get into another dream cycle because it's too overwhelming. And then you find yourself, often guys will start to drink alcohol or they'll start to self-medicate, so that way they don't have to sleep and they can avoid it as much as they can. That is when you start to develop an issue and a disorder around stuff. When you so to actually be classified with and diagnosed with a disorder according to psychology and mental health, you have to have a significant impairment in social functioning, in occupational functioning, in educational functioning. And it's not just an impairment, it has to have some significant impairment.
Okay.
And so there's functional impairment. And so now you're not performing in your job, so it's affecting your work, it's affecting your marriage, it's affecting your relationship with your kids, and you're starting to see these issues creep up. That's when you will start to say that I have technically a disorder that's starting to affect me.
Okay. Do you think it's more likely, just like on average, or maybe in your own experience with people that you've helped, do you think it's more likely for a cop to develop an actual nightmare disorder, or do you think it's more likely to develop a drinking problem to avoid the dreams in the first place? Which one do you think is more common?
That's a tough one. I think that the majority of people will end up drinking a lot to try to get back to sleep and quiet the dreams. And so then they end up with a drinking issue and they still have nightmares. Because you see, what happens is you could drink, and it will be very effective for a short period of time where you could drink to pass out. But in your sleep cycle, you have to get to sleep, you have to stay asleep, and then you have to wake up. And unfortunately, the more that you drink, it starts to affect the staying asleep part.
Mm.
So guys that were drinking, let's say, bunch of shots and some beers and stuff, right, to get to sleep, they wake up at 1, 2, 3 in the morning like an insomniac, and then they can't get back to sleep. And so then they drink more to try to get to sleep. And then some of them start to calculate in their mind, how much could I drink so I could be sober enough to get into my shift, the next day.
Yeah.
And so there is this kind of Russian roulette game that's being played,
Yeah.
So I feel like it starts really with the alcohol and it makes it worse. It makes the sleep worse overall. I have not met a single person. I've been in mental health now for 28 years, and I have not met a single person that alcohol has helped them in the long-term solution. It always ends up backfiring and hurting them. But the problem is that you're left with an addiction that you now have to treat an addiction in addition to a sleep issue.
Yes. Yeah.
When you are in a deep dream state, you sometimes believe when you wake up that you're still in that state. And so you could do things that you otherwise would not do. And so it's almost like you're in a fugue. And just to define that as like a dream state, that is reality and non-reality. And so I've known officers to do some things that have gotten them in trouble, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I say that because I want to say it generically, because I don't want to get into specifics on that stuff, but for other officers to know that can happen, and to make sure that they're safeguarding about mixing medications. And so I've seen bad results when people have mixed alcohol and sleep aids, for instance. I've seen that at least 3 times, where people have had very bad things where they've gotten arrested. And so I would always caution people against using sleep aids, especially, things that you get from the guys in the locker room. That's probably not the best one to take, and so if you're going to have any long-term kind of sleep aids, talk to your doctor about that stuff. A lot of people take melatonin gummies and other things to help them sleep, and you speak with a medical doctor about that before you get into self-medicating.
So what I'm hearing you say is that natural sleep, unassisted by alcohol, is the best cure to the nightmares. Even though you may still have some anxiety dreams, getting a longer period of sleep without it being alcohol induced is the best answer here.
Yes. So, and I'll preface that by saying that it's understandable that people want to avoid sleep, but if you embrace this suck of the bad dreams and you could get more than 6 hours after a period of time, like 2 weeks, you'll start to have an easier time sleeping without nightmares, because you just need that time to process. And I'm telling you, that happened to me. I worked, and I hate saying me because it was such a group effort, but last year in the fires of Lahaina in Maui, I was over there working the fires, and we were spending very long days, like 16, 17-hour days in the field, in the burn zones. And we were doing body retrieval and remain retrieval stuff. And I was with the guys as they were doing this with FEMA and our cops and stuff and fire. And I didn't have time to dream. And I was there. I was working in the field with them for 7 days straight. Didn't get any chance to dream. Every day was just a repetition of the last. And it was stuff that nobody had seen before. Nobody had seen, 5 square miles of burn and so many dead things, and it smelled like death everywhere, And when I came back home to Phoenix, I dreamt such bad dreams for about 10 nights straight. But I knew better, right? So I knew the things that I had to do. So I was speaking to my wife every day. I woke up, I would tell her, "Hey, sweetheart, this is what I dreamt last night." And it's really weird stuff, and then I knew that I had to still get back to sleep. I had to try. So, I have a time difference. I have, all of the stuff that I'm trying to process, but I had to. So it took me 10 nights the first time. The next time I went back was working in the zone, came back out at the end of the month. I only came back and I had 3 nights that were bad sleep, with bad dreams. But so it gets easier over time, and every traumatic event an officer goes through, they're going to have to adjust to that again and process that. But it's really trying to get towards that 7-hour mark that's going to help you. And even though you want to avoid the sleep, the best thing to is not to avoid the sleep, is to get back into it and try to think about the dream differently, where you could be the success person as opposed to the victim in the dream. Try to reframe things. Stuff like that you could talk to someone and try to get back into it, so that way you're not trying to avoid sleep.
Okay. So talking to somebody that is trusted and understands, that's helpful. And then you mentioned reframing the dreams. So if I have an anxiety dream that really bothers me because I was helpless and incompetent and all the things I don't want to be, then when I wake up, I should, rewrite the dream?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I was just woken up from a dream and started to rewrite it, where I was like, I don't want a dream to go that way. I want it to go this way. And I try to get back in the dream to write it a different way,
That's great. That's yes.
And then sometimes I wake up and I was like, I don't want to dream that anymore. I want to dream something else. And I cognitively make that decision that I want to dream something else.
Yeah. How frequently do first responders, especially police officers, come to you and mention nightmares? Is it common or is it uncommon?
Almost always.
Really?
See, I work with the most severe of trauma cases, and so I have people that are really involved with post-traumatic stress issues, and as a part of that, you not only have the avoidance and all the other components that come with it, but also the bad dreams. And so I hear that very often, and I want people to know that you're not alone. This is not something that you have to suffer in silence about, because if you start to talk about your dreams with other people, especially your colleagues that you work with, you're going to hear a lot of other people saying, man, that happens to me too, but
Yeah.
nobody wants to share that stuff sometimes.
Well, we're afraid to sound vulnerable, and
That's right.
especially police officers, they have to trust that the other officers can back them up and that they can do the same for the other officers. And so if somebody says, well, I'm weak and vulnerable and unsure of myself, that erodes that trust. And so I feel like it can still be done. I feel like we can say, hey, yeah, I had a bad dream. I have something I've been upset about. I have these issues in my life, and I'm still reliable. And I feel like that can be communicated. But
Yeah. You're right. And I also want to add a caveat there too. Female officers generally would not say it more than male officers, because female officers don't ever want to be perceived as being weak, and they have to fight every day to try to prove that they are tough and that they could do the job. And so I know that if they have any female officers listening, I think that is important for any male officers to know that that their female counterparts that are doing this job, they may be suffering or having some issues going on that they're never going to discuss because they never want to appear weak. And until we approach our colleague to be able to ask those questions, they may not feel safe to do so.
That's an excellent point. I've mentioned anxiety dreams, especially ones related to having to pull a weapon. But what other kind of dreams do cops have? Do you know of any other categories, or do you see certain dreams that keep popping up?
Yeah, so it will depend on your experience base. So folks that, for instance, work in SVU units with kids, so special victims units with sexual assaults and stuff, and they can't protect the child, they will have those types of dreams. Homicide detectives will have different types of dreams responding to bodies and things that they are doing. I've even had people that have worked in homicide that have responded to drownings, multiple drownings, depending on where they've lived. And so they couldn't prevent the person from drowning, or they're seeing bloated dead bodies in a river or a lake that they can't help or take care of. Past people that they've flipped over and they've seen dead. So there are a number of other types of anxiety-based dreams, if you will, that cause these nightmares. But I really feel it depends on the base of experience and the units that these folks work.
And almost all of these anxiety dreams are related to like not being able to accomplish a task. Is that the common thread?
Yeah, I would say that has accuracy to it. I have to think about that one, but I think that I would say that you're right. It has to be with not being able to complete a task. I would say so. I would say yes, just off the bat that would be accurate.
Sure. Do you ever get, maybe as a patient is getting healthier, do they ever report to you when their dreams change, when they start having happier dreams?
Oh yeah, for sure.
They do? Good.
It's great. I had one guy who came in, and he had been through a helicopter crash, and so it was funny because we sort of talk about so many other things that weren't even the helicopter crash, but it goes to my point that I spoke about earlier on, which is you could have relationship issues, financial issues that cause stress that lend those dreams to be worse. And once we started to address other life issues, those dreams went away completely. And he had been plagued by those dreams for over a decade and a half. So, he never quite sure exactly what's leading to it, but when you get into a multi-systemic approach of looking at a number of different things in a person's life, then things go away and then people start to report the good dreams, which is really cool. It is nice.
That's awesome. Well, Doctor, thank you for talking to me about this today. I really appreciate you talking to me, and I appreciate the work that you do.
You're welcome, Chaplain. And I truly appreciate the work that you are doing to be able to bring this voice across the nation to so many listeners and even internationally, so people would know that they're not alone and that they could get help if they need to.
I'm incredibly grateful to Dr. Rampersad for doing this interview. This is one of the topics that I had in mind more than 5 years ago before I ever started the Hey Chaplain podcast. I knew I wanted to discuss this and that it would be important to all of us, but I had to find the right person. Dr. Dominique Wong from Huntington, West Virginia recommended Dr. Rampersad, and Doug Monda from Cocoa Beach, Florida vouched for him. And Dr. Dara did not disappoint. I hope that whatever dreams are plaguing you, that you can, as Dr. Dara said, embrace the suck for a couple of weeks, sleep longer, and then have better nights ahead of you. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
Like, does everybody know the objective, right? And then they say if the objective is, if somebody's hurting kids in the library, the solutions make them stop. We're moving there. The person closest to the library should say on me. And we'd make a wrong turn. And then you say, wait, because a wait kills a call. Wait, library's this way, on me. And that's switched. And it's a different person. And it doesn't make sense for that person to run all the way over here. Man, now he's closest to the library. He says on me, everybody shifts on a dime and we're moving. And if you're that efficient, you know who wins? The kids. The ones that are still alive, or the one that needs a tourniquet. Why? Because you've already figured it out. But if that person doesn't know how to do it, then there's a question. Why?
This show is free for everyone because of those supporters who are quietly helping behind the scenes. They're the ones who pay for those refrigerator magnets and for my web hosting fees. If you want to help this show reach more cops, chaplains, and other first responders around the world, please support the show by following the link in the episode description. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Dr. Rampersad is a great doctor, but he's probably not your doctor. The information presented in this episode, including any statements or opinions expressed by Dr. Rampersad, is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment by a clinician who has actually met you. Always seek the advice of your qualified healthcare provider with any questions that you have regarding your mental health, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you heard on a podcast. Go see your doctor. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain. And as always, pray for peace in our city.